Hello, and welcome to another Steer Your Career podcast. I'm really excited to have another author on the pod, Kristi Coulter. She wrote Exit Interview. It's a fabulously engaging and intense story about her career at Amazon. She spent nearly a dozen years there, so a lot of stuff. She was there between 2006 and 2018 and had a very extraordinary career there. She was often the only woman at the table, and she kicked ass there. But Amazon's a tough culture. She talks about it in her book. She shares a little bit about it in this podcast. She talks about what she did to own her career. So enjoy this episode with Kristi and I. And if we can ever help you, academic careers, help you get a better job quickly, confidently, and with lots more money, check out our website, academicacareers.com, or you can always find me on LinkedIn. You can DM me. I have open DMs. Happy to help. But we offer personalized coaching. We offer academic careers acceleration community. We offer digital courses. So everything that you need to own your career, to advance your career, to move ahead in your career, we're here for you. With no further ado, I'll introduce you to Kristi in this episode of the Sick Podcast. Thanks. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Steer Your Career Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have an author, someone that I've learned about on LinkedIn, had a very exciting up and down career at Amazon, Kristi Coulter. She is the author of Exit Interview. And she has a very interesting story about her time at Amazon, her time up the corporate ladder, and dealing with a lot of bullshit and mishigas at Amazon. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce you, Kristi. Tell the Steer Your Career audience a little bit about who you are and a little bit about your book, too.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here. I actually started my career wanting to be a writer, really from the age of 4, which is when I learned to read and write. And my 2 degrees are both in English. So I did not have a classic prepping for tech background, although I am the daughter of a computer science professor who has been in the field since the 1960s. I went and got a degree in English and then a degree in creative writing. And I thought I would be an academic like my dad. And I quickly realized the world had changed, especially for the liberal arts. There were just no jobs. I would apply to jobs at like 3rd tier colleges, and I would get a letter back saying we had 5,000 applicants for this job. It was pretty terrible. So I thought, I guess I need some other kind of way to make sure I eat and have a roof. And I got a job at a place that music geeks might know called the All Music Guide, which was a Michigan-based company that had the goal of cataloging every music album ever recorded, like from the beginning of recording to the present. And so it was a tech company, but very much an editorial company. It was a giant database. And they hired me to be an editor because in addition to getting English degrees, I also spent a lot of time in sweaty basement rock clubs. I was like an indie rock chick to this day, honestly. So I was one of the people who helped to curate these collections and make sure the data was standard and that we used the right descriptors. And we licensed this stuff to early online retailers like BNN.com, and Amazon actually was a client. And I rose pretty quickly there to be the director of content. And I stayed there for probably another 6 years. And I had really run out of runway. It was a company, it was a startup. It really wasn't growing the way that they had wanted it to. My boss had been in the job since he was 20 and he was going nowhere. And we both knew it. And so I just started to get really bored, and I was 35 and I felt maybe this is the end of the road for me. Maybe this is it. Because when you're 35, you can feel like it's the end of the road. And I thought I'm just going to apply somewhere else. So I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is just a small job market. It's mostly a college town. And I applied to Amazon basically on a whim as a way to get my resume in shape. Yeah, it's a kind of a forcing function. And because my husband and I had been to Seattle a couple times and liked it. So I thought, why not? I think they called me 2 hours later. I did not expect to hear back from them at all. And they wanted to hire me or talk to me for a job that was actually a couple levels up from the one I had thought I was qualified for. And I thought, oh boy. And I thought, sure, why not? So I had a phone interview. Then they asked to fly me out. I think 1 week after applying, I was in Seattle interviewing at Amazon, just feeling like this is completely surreal. But I treated it as let's practice interviewing for the job you'll eventually get. And long story short, they ended up offering me the job. It was a job running site merchandising, which is basically on site product display and marketing for North American media. So the bookstore and movies and music and software and video games. It was 5 times as big as the job I'd had in Michigan. And I just thought, this is my chance. This is my chance to do something new. Let's do it. And so 3 weeks later, I was living in Seattle. We put our house on the market, packed up the dog, and moved to the West Coast. And I stayed at Amazon for 12 years. We can get into some of the different things I did there, but I ended up having, oh boy, I would say 3 distinct careers almost there, doing very different things as the company grew. And I saw it grow from, there were probably about 5,000 local employees when I got to Seattle, which seemed overwhelmingly huge to me coming from a company of 500. And by the time I left, I don't know, 60, 70,000, just vast growth. And when I left, I realized I was leaving because my first book was coming out. So that was one reason. I had started a writing career, the career I'd always wanted. And I didn't know that I was going to write an exit interview. But I had this feeling in the months after that Amazon is a really misunderstood company, or it's a very mysterious company. I think there is a lot behind the curtain that people don't understand. It's a little different now that there's leaks all the time. But at the time, it was a very buttoned down place. And I thought, I want to give people a sense of what it was like to be inside, because the inside was often so different from what people thought was happening. And as someone it's a highly male dominated company, especially at the upper middle management level that I occupied and up from there. And I also thought I want to give people a over the shoulder view of what it's like to be a woman in one of those environments where it's not about statistics or policy. It's just about what does it feel like day to day? And so those are really the 2 reasons that I wrote the book.
Yeah. And I listened to the book, which was also recorded by you, I believe. And I heard lots of the stories, which some of them were disturbing. A lot of them I'm quite familiar with. I never worked at Amazon. But I've worked with ex-Amazonians.
Yeah.
And when some of those Amazonians, and that's what I think you called each other,
Mm-hmm.
when some of them moved over to Tableau, because I was at Tableau
Okay, yeah.
in Seattle also, there was a culture clash, especially when Salesforce acquired us. And the different
I
culture
bet.
between the Amazonian and Salesforce was interesting. And a lot of that Amazonian culture has since been washed out of Tableau.
There
But
used to be stories about Nordstrom locally because people would go to work at Nordstrom and they would end up washing out because they would come charging in there like a bull in a china shop, wanting to change everything. And Nordstrom, it's a family run company. They're lovely people, but they're slower to change. And I just heard all these crazy stories where eventually they were afraid to hire Amazonians because they thought we were all going to be jerks. So lots of culture clashes.
yeah, totally. How would you describe the Amazon culture? I know it's a very unique culture, but like you were there for 12 years. How would you sum it up from your time there? And I know you did a lot in the book, but for our
Yeah,
listeners.
sure. The word that always comes to mind first is chaos. From the day I arrived at Amazon, there are structures, there's an orientation, there's an HR department, these things exist, but it's chaos. The pace of change is so fast. Decisions get made and unmade so quickly, which can be an amazing thing. That's one of the reasons Amazon's successful is that kind of agility. But you're constantly just trying to find your footing. And I think the people who succeed there are the people who come to terms with the fact that they're not going to find their footing. You have to get comfortable being on shifting sand all the time. It is creative, or at least it was in the early days. Amazon hired a lot of people who were from the island of misfit toys, brilliant people who were like the weird ones in high school or college and had really cool ideas. It is somewhat egalitarian in terms of level. Everybody has a voice, which is terrific. Although, of course, certain people are making the decisions, and that's fine. It is argumentative, confrontational in a way that is often really productive, but can be, I think, overdone to the point where things just feel confrontational when they don't need to be. There's a real hard edge to it. And ultimately, it just feels like you're in this giant machine that almost, I started to think of Amazon as an organism. It's like a life form almost, especially as it grew and grew, and every part of it was feeding every other part, where you're just this little, almost like a minnow in the belly of a whale. I felt like that a lot, especially in the last probably 5 or 6 years I was there.
Yeah. And you were there for 12 years. You got promoted
Yeah.
multiple times during your tenure there. What level did you come in at? And I recall from the book, you had challenges at the end. They were dangling the director carrot
Oh,
uh,
yes.
in front of you for years, but I think you had a pretty rapid climb earlier on in your career there.
Yes and no. I came in as a level 7, so right under director, and I stayed there for 12 years. So I was never promoted in level. My jobs got bigger and bigger. So in technically I was not being promoted. In reality I was, and I was making more money. But as someone who had always been, I was the kind of young woman who got promoted like clockwork, like every year and a half or every 2 years. Like, this is just who I am, an overachiever. So to not ever get that promotion was a huge deal for me. And it really was. Amazon's promotion system, I think a lot of tech companies, it's somewhat of a black box. And so I actually started keeping notes at one point because I'd be told every year or two that I was a year away. And then the reason I wasn't, that I was still another year away, would always be different.
Right.
And eventually I just thought, okay, fine. I'm just going to get what I can out of this place. But I never really did figure out why I didn't make it. Yeah.
And they kept paying you, though. They kept giving you
Oh, yeah.
RSUs. And Amazon also is notorious for having an up or out sort of culture where they
Mhm.
skim off the bottom 5 or 10%. I don't know if it's publicly shared what the number is, but it's
Yeah,
kind
it
of
was
thing.
around 5%, I think. Yeah, they were very good to me. I also was there at a time when the stock was going insane. So all of us for a while were making more than market rate because the RSUs had been issued at a time when the stock was worth a lot less. That was great. We really enjoyed that. And I was fortunate that a level 7 is considered like a very respectable career level. And I was also I wasn't senior software engineer or something. I was in pretty rare roles. I often wrote my own job descriptions. So I think there was a sense of, if she never goes any further, that's fine. She's the best at what she does, and she's obviously very useful. So it was never a worry of being pushed out because there was nobody behind me trying to take my place.
Yeah. As you prepared for Amazon's interview back in 2006, I think they still had a similar sort of interview process where they focus on the leadership principles. Back then, I think they had 14 leadership principles. They've added two more
Yeah.
recently, which is
Yeah.
interesting because one of them, the one strive to be the Earth's best employer, which
Uh,
is, yeah, like I said, like for those that can't see this, Kristi rolled her eyes at that, which
yeah.
I rolled my eyes at
And a
that too,
cringe.
especially after hearing your story and
Mhm.
the challenges that you had. How, with all their other leadership principles about be frugal and focus on the
Mhm.
customer and some of the things like how they do treat their employees almost like
Mhm.
cogs in the wheel,
Yeah. Yeah.
how that just seems so lacking integrity of what they do. It's just a performative bullshit value that they put out there. I'm curious how effective you thought they were in terms of
Mhm.
striving to be Earth's best employer.
I thought they were, I always like to distinguish between the people I worked with day to
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
most of whom were terrific. I loved most of my direct managers, and the organism. The organism is awful. I never felt that it cared about me at all. I felt like if I died, the people I worked with would be upset, but like Amazon wouldn't care. We were all replaceable, and we were reminded of that at every juncture. There was very little saying thank you for a job well done. It was like, okay, great. Now what have you done in the last 5 minutes for me? There were no perks. I was at a coffee shop a couple years before I left, and this young woman was having her boss from a startup was trying to just give her a pep talk. because she was struggling. And he said, I'm a huge eavesdropper as a writer. And he said, this isn't Amazon. I can't give you the free haircuts and the subsidized food and the gym. And I was like, what is he talking about? I wanted to turn around and be like, no, we had none of that. Like all the stories you hear about tech luxuries, like they paid for some of our garage fees. That was literally, that was all the perks. And we got $100 off the website a year if we remembered to go and claim the code. So
Right.
it was just the physical environment was incredibly cramped. People were working in hallways, just open plan, just everyone on the phone. Conference rooms, almost impossible to come by. I used to have to leave the building and go to like a Starbucks or something to do actual work. And I used to feel that Amazon was actually daring me to do my job. Like we were in some kind of sick party game or something.
Yeah.
So when I heard about this principle to strive to be Earth's best employer, I was probably the year after I left. And I know it was in response to a lot of the horrible publicity about drivers peeing in water bottles and things like that. And I thought, great, this is terrific because when Amazon decides to do something, they often do it really well. And I thought maybe some really creative things will come out of this. But I talked to a lot of people on the inside still, and they're pretty miserable these days, I would say. I hear a lot of misery. I don't hear anything about things getting better, especially after Jeff left.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because that story that you eavesdropped, they were probably talking about Google.
Exactly. Exactly. I used to be jealous of Google.
I was at Google and we had ex Amazonians there, and they're like, holy cow, it's so nice over here.
Yeah.
And it always, we, at least during my time at Google, I was there 2011 to 2016, and it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns at
Yeah.
Google either. But it always made me curious about why someone would choose to go to Amazon where they are frugal versus like Google where they would just shower stuff on us. Like I went to Amazon to interview, and in their micro kitchen, they gave away free bananas. And at Google, you get sushi bars and ice cream trucks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. When I first got to Amazon, it was before the modern campus had been built. We were just in 3 buildings scattered around downtown Seattle, and there wasn't even a cafeteria. It was just nothing. And I know that Google and places like that, they're not giving you free stuff out of the goodness of their hearts.
right.
So it's like there's dry cleaning, so you don't have to leave to pick up your dry cleaning. But still, I used to think like I would still like this stuff. I would still like my life to be a little bit easier. For me, I went to Amazon because I was really entering tech. I was not a seasoned tech worker who could think about the landscape. I think people who have more options often go to Amazon because you really can, I would say now, if you're in the right org, feel like you're getting your hands dirty in a way that I don't actually know if that feels possible at Google or Meta or places like that. You're really like, you have access to the code for the website. You can make a change that, tens of millions of people will see in 5 minutes. And the problems Amazon was trying to solve, I think this is true of Google too, were so big and unwieldy. And that's really exciting for people. I got to work on Amazon Publishing and Amazon Go, and these are industries I wouldn't have been able to just waltz into otherwise without 10 years of experience. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Now with Amazon kind of pulling back on some of those moonshot projects, I don't know if that will be the same.
In listening to your book, you talked a lot about how intense the culture was, and you'd come home and finish a bottle of wine some nights. And
Yes.
I think it led to a lot of bad behaviors, not behaviors, but like ways that you were trying to cope with all the stress. Because it seems like you did not have a great support network internally, and nor did they care to provide one for you.
Yeah, I was very much on my own. We all were. It was even now and then I'd have a manager who seemed remote, and I would just realize it's because they were also drowning. Nobody was like, I don't care about Kristi. They were just, I've got 18 other things I need to be doing. Yeah, I actually ended up getting sober in about 5 years before I left, because if I kept drinking the way I was, like I was not going to live a full life. And it really just crept up on me to where a bottle of wine a night was just normal. And there was a lot of drinking at Amazon. There were bars out on the floors that people would build. People would have whiskey bottles on their desks. It was really strange when you think about it. I'd come from the Midwest where that was just really not a thing, having liquor on your desk. And it reminded me of Mad Men or something,
Yeah.
that kind of atmosphere. People would stop, have a drink at 6, and then go back to work for 3 hours. It was that kind of thing. So I think there were a lot of people I knew who left to regain their health, whether it was substances or because they had gained 60 pounds in a year or no longer had time to exercise. There was broken marriages. The stress was intense and people just we're not equipped to deal with that kind of thing forever, you know.
Yeah. It's definitely a tough atmosphere. And so what kept you there for so long?
The money, partly.
Yeah. The money. Yeah.
The money was incredible and I really enjoyed it. When people say that money doesn't matter, I think those are people who have enough money. I really like the money. I part of me did not think I would be hireable anywhere else. I think my self-esteem took such a beating at Amazon. Even while I was succeeding and getting bigger and bigger jobs, I always felt like I was failing. And that was partly Amazon and partly just who I am. And so I did not think anybody else would hire me. And part of it was just that honestly, Amazon could be pretty thrilling. I got to work on really cool stuff that excited me with people who were brilliant. And so Amazon at its best could be a blast to work at. For all of the money they didn't pour into employee experience, they would certainly, Jeff Bezos kept writing us checks for this publishing company that we were struggling to establish. He had patience for that. Amazon Go, which I worked on when it was a secret project, I don't know that many CEOs who would keep writing giant checks for that, something that sounded that crazy. I didn't think I could find that anywhere else. And I don't know that I could have. And so that kept me for a long time, too long, honestly. And it was also the fact that you can change jobs so dramatically at Amazon. When I would hit the wall somewhere, I never felt that I had to leave the company to reinvent myself, especially because I had a pretty fungible skill set. I would just think, oh, well, what else might I like to do? And start my life over again.
And you talk about part of the things that kept you there is you didn't think you could leave, not just the money, but
Mhm.
you mentioned it sounded a lot in your book about imposter syndrome and that you weren't good
Yeah.
enough. Talk a little bit about that, it sounds like even when you started there, you felt a little bit like an imposter. And I don't know if that,
Some imposter syndrome today. I think I've had a book reviewed on the front page of the New York Times now, and I'm still waiting for my writing career to start. What about why didn't I get this other thing? I had huge imposter syndrome, and Amazon thrives on fear. The company thrives on workers feeling like they might be cut. And so there is this sense of we want you to be afraid and worried that you're not doing enough. And I think it attracts people who are prone to feel that way anyway. So it's this perfect vicious cycle. I also realized over my 12 years there, I got to know so many people, including like senior vice presidents and people who seemed like masters of the universe. And they would eventually confess to me they had imposter syndrome. And I started to realize that maybe we all have it, except
Mhm.
for a select few. And if we all have it, then is it really a thing? It was this mind shift where I thought if we all feel a little bit in over our heads, maybe that's just the nature of the work we're doing or the place we're in. And I don't have to feel like I'm a freak for feeling this way. And when I went to work for Amazon Go, the guy who would become my boss said when he hired me, I need you to feel comfortable with not knowing what you're doing because we're building something that doesn't exist and I don't know what I'm doing. And Gianna, who is my VP, doesn't know what she's doing. And I found that thrilling and comforting that we all did not know what we were doing, that it took my imposter syndrome away because I was like, well, you're not an imposter. You don't know what you're doing. This is science fiction that you're working in. So I always tell people imposter syndrome, rather than try to fix yourself to make it go away, you might be better off sometimes just moving forward anyway.
Yeah.
Waiting a long time.
And right, so you were talking to some senior leaders that also felt this, and it's something that I don't know if it's a myth or that it impacts women more than men. And I
Yeah.
think I've seen some research recently from Harvard Business Review
Mhm.
that it impacts everybody.
Yeah.
But it
Yeah.
probably, I would imagine it's tougher as a woman at Amazon
Mhm.
where you're surrounded very male culture, probably
Mhm.
everybody above you up to Jeff Bezos's level are predominantly men. Although in your
Yeah,
book,
yeah,
you
overwhelmingly,
definitely had
yeah.
some women bosses. Although the way
Mhm.
you described them, some of their approaches was very masculine sounding and just
They had to be
hard, hard,
very male in their
hardcore.
approach. Yeah.
Yeah, not that
I
women can't be hardcore, but just very not
mm,
emotional driven. Just this is what we're doing.
a very like fine line. There's a lot of research showing that women have to walk this really fine balance because if you're too feminine, then no one takes you seriously. But if you're too masculine, then they don't like you. And so it's always, how do I, oh my God, I'm on a tightrope. And so my female bosses could be very different with me behind closed doors than they were in a meeting, which we all have to code switch like that. I think even white men are code switching according to who they're talking to. But I do think that women have been told that they have imposter syndrome and that they need to fix it and do all these different things to get rid of it. I think that women are prone to have it, but if when you're in an environment where you're the only woman and you're not being treated like one of the others, is that imposter syndrome or are people just not, are you just acting rationally? Like that's a rational reaction when you feel like an alien, I think. So I used to talk to women about maybe you're not an imposter, maybe you don't have imposter syndrome, maybe you're just being rational. You're being treated like you don't belong. So, yeah, you feel like you don't belong. I don't have a fix to that, but it was a way of making women feel like maybe you're not broken. Maybe the environment is broken
Yeah,
and it impacts you.
and when you're an imposter, it often when you're dealing with any struggle, it's always good to know that there's other people in your boat and other people that you can
Mm-hmm.
talk to. And you mentioned in some of the notes before we chatted here
Mm-hmm.
about often being the only woman at the table, fighting for that. Also, it did not seem from listening to your book a very inclusive environment, not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
exclusive, but
Right.
it's like you got to fight your own battle here. We're not opening a door for you. It's there if you want to push
Mm-hmm.
it open, but it's a hard
Yeah.
door. It seems like a hard door to push for everybody.
It really was. It's I don't think the company is easy for anyone. And there's something insidious. It's an interesting experience of sexism because it was not like they were like girls are stupid. This was not there weren't nudie posters on the walls. I've been in much worse environments, but it was dangerous, but men thought they were egalitarian. And that's really dangerous because you can't speak to it. But what would happen is they all were so similar, and so similarity bias would really come into play. And they would just replicate, they would just keep hiring themselves and promoting themselves. And there was this idea that meant meritocracy. And it was really, we started doing some training on unconscious bias in the last few years. And I did some help with that. And I saw some men, it was fascinating. It was actually really moving to me who did not realize they could have an unconscious bias. And they would just be like, oh my God, I have racist thoughts. I have racist impulses. Yeah, you do. We all do. You have sexist impulses. So do I as a woman. And to see the light go on in their eyes was fascinating because they truly were shocked and shaken by it. But when you're in the kind of environment where people don't realize that they can have sexist or racist impulses, it's really hard to fight that. You can't go to HR and complain that your colleagues don't realize their unconscious biases. It's not misbehavior. It's just you're the other. You just don't quite belong.
And it's not there to help the employee. They're there to
No.
help the leadership to cover
Right.
their ass, essentially.
Right. Unless it was something absolutely egregious. And maybe even in those cases, who
Even
knows?
then, it's only covering the company's ass so they don't get
Yeah,
sued.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting, and I think it prevails in tech a lot when you have these sort of all male, largely white or maybe white and Asian environments, like just tends to attract. And then you start to think that this is the norm and everyone else is like a quote DEI hire or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. There's lots of things that men can do. I learned about unconscious bias. I was at Google when Trayvon Martin was murdered. You were probably at Amazon during then.
Yeah.
I went through lots of training. It was helpful for me. Like, I think during
Mhm.
these trainings, for people that want to learn, want to understand the other perspective, I never
I
heard of the
loved
term
it.
microaggression before. And then I was like, oh,
Uh-huh.
wow.
Right, right.
There's things that the people at the in party, like the majority, can do,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
really up to them to make that decision. And now with the backlash on DEI, I
Mhm.
don't know how much pressure there's going to be for people to do that. So,
Yeah.
assuming that the door is not going to be opened up, what can women do? it's a bummer that it's like the group that's being impacted has to make the effort. But
Right.
if you wait
Right.
for the people in power to bring you to the table, it may or may not happen. What were you able to do, and
Mhm.
and what advice do you have for people that the
Yeah.
environment's probably not going to change, especially with the new administration?
Yeah.
It is what it is,
And
unfortunately.
companies like Amazon, they made a big thing out of how they wanted to have more women in leadership. And but by their publicly reported stats, like it's gone up, I don't know, 6 basis points or something in 4 years. It's really like a rounding error.
Which Amazon would never deal, like if it was like customer satisfaction or
Exactly.
revenue or something like that, they would not put
Oh
up with
no,
that.
they would. It was like if they actually cared. There's so many brilliant people they're doing out of the box things. It would change, but I think that unfortunately, there's only so much that women can do, because if we don't have access to the levers of power, we can't pull the levers of power. And one thing I would say to women is, when I was in my career there, your mentor, it was like you always wanted another woman as your mentor. And I see that as a huge blind spot of mine looking back. Having a role model only takes you so far. What you want is someone who will end up being a sponsor for you.
Mhm.
And I would seek out male mentors. There was almost this sense of, I can't ask them. Sure you can. You use it, and it's part of their job as senior leaders to be available for that kind of thing. So I would say, I also think growing up as a Gen X woman when sexual harassment was really rampant, there was this part of me that was like, oh, I can't do that because God only knows what I'm letting myself into. But I never took the chance. I should have taken the chance and dealt with it later on. I can cope with that. So that's one thing I would say. You have to demand that seat at the table when it comes to sponsorship and mentorship. Also, just don't do the grunt work any more than you have to.
Yeah.
Don't raise your hand for the diversity committee or anything else that's going to be thankless work. It's so hard. I think women, we want to be like good team players, and you need to be a good teammate, but don't be the one who organizes the birthday lunches. Like,
Right. It's a
just
thankless
don't do it.
task. And not only is it thankless, it's actually negative because if you're
Yeah.
spending time organizing the birthday lunch, the other people are focused on creating that 6 pager for Jeff.
Yeah, exactly. I got to the point that if there was someone who needed to take notes at the meeting, I would just be like, sit on your hands, Kristi. You're not, because my impulse was to be like, sure, I'll do it. But I knew that it wasn't like a respected or powerful
Yeah.
thing to do. So I had to change my own. If the conference room door was open and can someone close that? I would just be like, you just keep your butt in this chair. You're not moving. And I felt like a jerk, but then I was like, no, let someone else do it. So that, and then I also, to turn it around a little bit, I think men need to realize that there's ample research at this point that diverse teams make better business decisions than homogeneous teams. They're more successful. So if you don't have women and people in color on your team, I guess you need to ask yourself if you want to be maximally successful or just
Especially for
maximally
business
comfortable.
like Amazon, where I'm sure half of the customers are women,
Oh yeah.
if not more. And
Yeah.
now in my household, my wife and daughter like
Yeah.
are always buying crap on Amazon.
Women control me too. Women control something like 70 or 75% of the purchasing power in America. So it was always, we should really, like, women should have designed the baby registry. Women should have designed the wedding registry. So I think men at Amazon, whenever diversity would come up, men would take it seriously for 5 seconds. And then they would be like, there's thought diversity. And they'd be like, as long as we all think differently. And it would come down to, this guy's from McKinsey, but this one came right out of Stanford. So they're very different. I think you need to realize that when we talk about diversity, it's not about skin color or body parts. It's about the fact that I've lived a very different life just because of my body parts, because of how I'm perceived in the world. Someone who's Black has just lived a different life. And so we have different experiences and different things to bring to the table. It's not about how we look, it's about how we've been treated because of how we look. And that is diversity. And that's how you get the good ideas or the challenging to ideas that are okay but could be better. So I think that whether it's a formal part of companies or not, like, men need to, if you want to make money and change the world, you're going to do that better if you have people who aren't like you on your team.
Mhm.
And it might be uncomfortable, but you know what? you're a big boy. You're going to live. You're going to be fine. You might even enjoy it.
Yeah, right. And it's almost like an abundance mindset that there's plenty of space for lots of
Yeah, yeah. And DEI is really about casting a wide enough net that you find great talent where it lives. It's not about preferences or quotas or lowering the bar. At Amazon, I worked with a team once that was trying to hire Black designers, and they were just having a terrible time. And we finally hired this consultant who ran a national nonprofit for Black designers. And she said, well, you're looking in the elite design schools, and Black designers are really underrepresented there. And the ones who come out of there are unicorns. And they're not going to go to Amazon. They're going to go to Google for $500,000 a year and start their own labs. And she said, you need to be looking in these specific community colleges and state universities with great design programs. And we were just like, oh, it seems so obvious. But Amazon was always recruiting from elite schools, and we were never going to find great Black talent in sufficient numbers in those schools. And she said, but it's there. It might not be as polished as someone coming out of MIT, but that's where you're going to find it. So that, to me, that's DEI. Veteran recruiting programs are DEI. It's not affirmative action.
Yeah. And I think even those committees that are trying to find those diamonds in the rough, I don't know if those committees exist anymore, and I don't know if the investment exists. So I think it's more and more incumbent on folks that are not coming out of RISD, like the Royal Institute of Design or Stanford or whatever schools are coming out of, to be more proactive, because you're not as hard as it's been for forever. It's not going to get any easier anytime soon. It doesn't appear.
It really won't. And I think also like individual hiring managers and companies, even if Amazon or Google doesn't have a DEI program anymore, individual people can make a lot of trouble.
Yes.
And so I think you can be like, hey, I need to see more of this, or do your own poking around. But yeah, that doesn't scale, obviously. Like some individual rabble rouser, it's going to be tough. Yeah.
Yeah. Kristi, I really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed your book as well. Two last questions I have for you. One, what is one piece of sick career advice you'd like to leave our Steer Your Career listeners with?
I like to tell people, don't get too hung up on your education and credentials. I'm not talking about like dentistry or something where credentials really matter, but I came to Amazon with 2 English degrees, but I was a great communicator. I was organized. I knew how to manage people, and I could take that in a lot of different directions. So a general skill set and critical thinking can do a lot for you. A lot of the other stuff is just subject matter. I went into the grocery business at Amazon. I went into the publishing business. I had to learn these things, but that was learnable. So I see people shut themselves out of possibilities all the time because they didn't pick that career when they were 20 years old, basically a teenager. And I would say, don't do that. Look at your broader skill set is probably my sickest piece of career advice.
Nice. I like that one. The last question I have, where can people find you? Where can people support you? Where can people find your latest books?
My website is just KristiCoulter.com, and there has links to everything I've written. I'm on LinkedIn, and the most recent book is called Exit Interview, The Life and Death of My Ambitious Career. And it's actually out in paperback now. You can get it pretty much anywhere books are sold. I read the audiobook. That was a lot of fun too. So if you're an audiobook person, that's also a good experience. You can buy both if you want. I won't mind. And my first book is a memoir and essays called Nothing Good Can Come From This. And it is about the process of getting sober. It's a very irreverent book. It's not self-help or a preachy book. I don't care if you drink, but it's about my process. And it also does touch on my tech career and life in Seattle and the way that those sort of played into both my drinking life and my sober life. So if you like the voice of Exit Interview, you'll enjoy the first book too. They're very much of a piece.
Awesome. I'll have to add that to my Audible queue.
I read that one too.
Yeah. I feel like I know you a little bit because I heard you read Exit Interview to me. So I really appreciate that.
It's the funny thing about being a memoirist is you meet people and they're like, oh, and your husband. And I'm like, how do you know my husband? And I'm like, you told them everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome, Kristi. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your story, your advice of moving up at Amazon and leaving there sane and sober too.
And sober, it's true. I ended up being sober for half my Amazon career. And I can tell you it is doable. There's actually a surprising number of people out there who are either sober or just don't drink. It's they're just quiet.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and thanks for teaching us all how to own our career.